Brion McClanahan is a faculty member at mylibertyclassroom.com, holds a PhD in U.S. history from the University of South Carolina, and he's the author of many books you will find interesting, including The Founding Fathers' Guide to the Constitution, The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Founding Fathers, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Real American Heroes, and most recently, 9 Presidents Who Screwed Up America and 4 Who Tried to Save Her. Brion, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Tom. I appreciate it.
It's being said that Donald Trump is going to affect the party system. He's going to maybe destroy the Republican Party or change it beyond recognition. I actually am looking at an article from Politico that ran just a few days before you and I are talking here. And I know about it because you sent it to me. And it's called How an Outsider President Killed a Party. But of course, they're not talking about Donald Trump. They're talking about Zachary Taylor, who was nominated in 1848. And we're talking about the Whig Party, which never recovered. So let's try and understand this first by understanding what the Whig Party is. I mean, initially the Whig Party developed in response to Andrew Jackson. So you had an ideologically diverse party that was united on the grounds that they don't like the executive style of Andrew Jackson and what they would call executive usurpation by Andrew Jackson. But you could find people who were otherwise fairly laissez-faire. They just didn't like Andrew Jackson because they thought he was an imperial president, if I may use an anachronistic term. But then there were others who were against Andrew Jackson because they wanted a national bank and internal improvements and so on and so forth. So the Whig Party was a pretty darn big tent. Tell us about that. What was the big problem with Zachary Taylor?
The article tries to illustrate that Zachary Taylor, being nominated by the Whigs in 1848, destroyed the party because you had stalwarts like Henry Clay and Daniel Webster who looked at Taylor as this guy who was a bumpkin. He didn't know anything. He was just a general, the guy who was not a politician. And so he gets elected in 48, and the Whig Party doesn't know what to do. They don't know what Zachary Taylor is going to be. Is he going to be an ideological Whig like Henry Clay? Is it going to be something else? Now, it's important to remember that the Whig Party actually won the 1840 election with a guy who was just like Zachary Taylor, William Henry Harrison. He was a general, too, and he wasn't ideological. He was just this war hero from the War of 1812, which is why Andrew Jackson called him a grainy general. But he's there from this long ago war, and of course he dies, and then John Tyler, who I say is the best president in American history, becomes president. So Polk wins in 44, beats Henry Clay, and so 1848 rolls around, and the Whigs dust off the old playbook. We'll just nominate this war hero, and we'll win the executive branch. And lo and behold, it works. But Henry Clay is furious because he doesn't think Zachary Taylor is going to be a guy that's going to lead the Whigs forward like he wants. And I think that's where this article misses the point. First of all, he says Taylor destroyed the Whig Party. He did nothing of the kind. The Whig Party destroyed itself after the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. It still ran a major candidate in 1852, Winfield Scott, another war hero. So they were using this playbook to try to get votes, and it worked 2 out of 3 times. I think when you look at Taylor, I actually consider him one of the best presidents, and usually people say that because Taylor died in office. You know, it's the old joke, well, who are the best presidents? It's Harrison, Taylor, and Garfield because they all died before they could do any damage. But actually, Taylor did a pretty good job of using executive powers the way the founders designed the Constitution to do it. You know, this guy doesn't like it because Taylor's not one of these go out there and ram everything through the Congress and act as a king. He's not that kind of president. He points out that Taylor didn't know what he was doing because of the slavery issue, but he misses that Millard Fillmore is the one who actually crafted the Compromise of 1850, and Taylor was against it. So it's interesting how this article really distorts the election of 48 to try to denounce Trump.
So let's talk about McKinley versus William Jennings Bryan.
We have this 1896 election, and it's a really interesting election for a lot of reasons. First of all, you have the Republicans nominate a man named William McKinley of Ohio, and McKinley was seen as a conservative Republican. Now, this is important because you had this push in the late 19th century of progressivism. It was really starting to take hold, and there was a thought that in 1896 it had finally been crushed because of this election. You know, there was people talking about, well, we finally defeated progressivism. It's done. It's never going to come back. We beat these people. Of course, and just 5 years later, you have Teddy Roosevelt become president after McKinley's assassinated, and you have this headfirst plunge into progressivism. So it was thought that maybe this thing is done. One of the reasons why they thought it was killed is because the Democrats nominate William Jennings Bryan, and he was a progressive Democrat. And so the Democrat Party actually moved a little left. They were breaking away from Grover Cleveland, who was a very conservative Democrat. They're moving away from that, and they're going more left. And one of the major issues in 96 was bimetallism. Isn't that great? People actually talked about monetary policy. So you had Bryan saying we need to have a bimetallism, which is silver. And he made this very famous cross of gold speech where the imagery was the farmer being nailed to the cross of gold. Well, the interesting part of this election is the fact that conservative Democrats broke away and formed their own party called the National Democratic Party. The NDP didn't have a whole lot of electoral success, but it showed that the conservatives were not happy with the fact that the Democrats were going left, and they weren't certain if McKinley would be their guy, so they splintered off. You have the possibility of a splinter party, but Trump is not McKinley. And one thing you said early on is, people are talking about the Republican Party will die. Well, I think that's a great thing. I'm not going to shed any tears if the Republican Party goes down the tubes, and I don't think anybody else should either. But, we are talking about third-party runs. Maybe, you have the Libertarian Party out there, maybe a split in the Republican Party, maybe even a split in the Democrat Party. If that happens, we're looking more like 1912 than 1896, to be frank.
I just saw a tweet the other day from Bill Kristol saying something along the lines of, what does it mean in the age of Trump to be a Republican? Does it mean limited government? Does it mean fiscal sanity and personal liberty and all these things that Bill Kristol hasn't been concerned about in years, if he ever was? So I wrote back and said, well, why didn't you start a Never McCain campaign or Never Romney or Never Bush? I mean, these people were horrendous, horrifying people. And the differences between them and Trump, I think, are cosmetic. I mean, they're not, in other words, if there's something about Trump that outrages you, then these other three should have outraged you 50 times more, but generally they don't. So there's something fishy going on in that whole thing.
The reason that all these guys hate Trump is because of his foreign policy. I mean, that's it. It comes down to that. Trump has made some statements where he's not as much of a warmonger as they are. I mean, he's not an anti-war guy. He's just not as much of a warmonger as they are. So that's really what it comes down to. They don't like that. And it just shows that the Republican Party has become the war party. And if there's no war, then they don't know what to do. That said, I think if Trump wins, one thing that may happen, you might have to look at 1981. When Ronald Reagan won in 1980, there was a lot of talk, just like with Trump. I mean, you got this blue-collar coalition. This guy is going to come in and he's going to change the Republican Party. He's going to bring back old, long-forgotten right back into the fold. And, people like Emmy Bradford were being discussed for, the National Endowment for the Humanities. Here's a paleo-conservative. This guy's not, one of these neocons like a Gerald Ford type Republican. He's a real old-school right-winger. And, of course, Bill Bennett and others got word of this, and they blocked it, and that split the old right off again. And so Reagan was listening to all the neocons. Now, I'm not certain if that's going to happen with Trump, but I think there is still a threat with that. As you mentioned, the neocons are very strong. The Republican establishment has got a lot of vested interest in this, and they don't want to see their entire career go down the tubes in one election. So they're going to try to influence Trump, and I hope that he has the backbone not to have it happen, but I think it's more likely that it would happen than not. Though Trump's statements against the establishment have been so nasty that I'm not certain he's really going to accept them. In the short term, Trump might do some good and try to weed out some of these people, but they're like cockroaches. They're a cancer. They always come back. I don't see Trump having a lasting impact on the Republican Party other than maybe an election or two, because we saw that already. Reagan, for all of his faults, was kind of this aberration. Then you have George H.W. Bush. Then you have Bob Dole. Then you had George W. Bush and John McCain and Mitt Romney. That is the Republican Party. These other people are just aberrations, and they'll go away. And so I think they're just going to bide their time and wait to come back in another 4 or 8 years.
Yeah, these people have wormed their way into these positions by hook or by crook, and they're not going to let some blustery guy take that all away from them. I, at times, have been heartened by, frankly, some of his insults, because he often insults the right people. Like he said about Bill Kristol the other day, there's this guy, Bill Kristol. All this guy wants to do is go to war with people and kill people.
Kristol's the one he's the last one. Don't forget. He said Trump will never run. The guy's not a smart person. I see him on the different shows. He's got no credibility. He looks like such a fool.
Mitt Romney never said that about Bill Kristol, so I thought that was pretty good. And then I turn around, and he's got Chris Christie on his transition team, and he's got Giuliani playing a role. On the one hand, you say, all right, well, he's got to have some people in the establishment in there, but it makes you think after all this, he'll wind up being a somewhat more blustery Dwight Eisenhower. I think the antics are for the election cycle. I think if you were a journalist, you'd be disappointed at how boring his administration would turn out to be. But that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, you're right. He's got Christie and Giuliani. Now that's homegrown. I mean, even though he will insult Chris Christie right to his face on the stage.
Oh, about eating Oreos. Yeah.
I'm not eating Oreos anymore. You know that. But neither is Chris. You're not eating Oreos anymore.
That's the one thing that Trump has provided. Everything he does is so very funny. I mean, I can't help but laugh at the stuff that he does. It's great, and that's refreshing. I actually wrote an article for Breitbart where I said Trump is elevating public discourse, because there's this, Trump is, he's so awful. He's doing things that nobody has done before. This is so untrue. Just go back and look at early 19th century politics and what these people said about each other. It was hilarious. Can't even yell out at an address, you're a liar, and then, oh my gosh, the thought police come out, you have to be hushed and thrown away in the gulag for making a statement about the president. How dare you do that? We've gotten to a point where we're a bunch of wusses, and so Trump is actually doing something that's so fun and refreshing that they just don't know how to react. Some people have said it's kindergartenish. I think it's great, and I hope it continues. But you're right. He's going to get some of the neocons in there, and I think he'll tone down eventually, and it will become rather boring. Every now and then he'll probably throw out an insult, like he insulted that reporter the other day and, called him sleazy. That was fantastic, too, because they are.
I'm not looking for credit, but what I don't want is when I raise millions of dollars, have people say, like this sleazy guy right over here from ABC. He's a sleaze in my book. You're a sleaze because you know the facts, and you know the facts well.
But, I don't think at the end of the day you're going to see this continue if Trump is elected. He's definitely going to tone things down and be much more manageable, and I think the establishment is going to have their way with him ultimately.
My understanding is that when he was getting questions about legal issues and about Supreme Court nominees, he reached out to the Federalist Society to brief him and give him names. Well, I'm not necessarily 100% on board with everybody in the Federalist Society, but that's where I would look. If I really didn't know what I was doing, I would ask them. Have you ever spoken at a Federalist Society event?
I have, yeah, once.
Okay, yeah. So we've spoken for the Federalist Society. So if he's asking people who would have the gall to invite you and me to speak, if he's asking them for advice, that is at least something.
I think that Trump has been able to manipulate the popular media so well and garner so much enthusiasm. At the same time, so many people hate this guy. I think looking back, 50 years from now, people will look at this election as a very interesting election cycle. Not just Trump, but then you have the felon running for the Democrats. I think it's amazing how this cult of personality has really factored into this election. It's something that I haven't ever seen before, and I think people don't know what to think about it. Trump is just that unique in American political history. You have to be suspicious of any person that wants that much power and is willing to raise that much money for themselves and how they're going to get it. Trump, in his first speech that he made for president, he said, look, I'm rich. I'm filthy stinking rich. I don't need any money. I don't need anybody to give me money. I'm just going to run. That's why, in some ways, Trump is refreshing, too, because he's not out there begging for people to give to his campaign. He doesn't have to make promises to anybody. He can just say what he wants. And if it doesn't work out, oh, well. Whereas anyone else would have to go out and get, this guy to give him money and this lady to give him money and this corporation to give him money and this PAC to give him money. And then you make all these promises, and it really creates a disaster when you start looking at how policy is formed off of those promises.
Brion, Brion, McClanahan.com.